Welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is Professor N. Purendra Prasad. I teach in the Department of Sociology, University of Hyderabad. This course actually is Sociology of Health. Today I am going to teach you one module, Theoretical Perspectives in Sociology of Health. The objectives of this module are to explain various theoretical perspectives in sociology of health. Second, to demonstrate how theories and concepts help the interconnection between medicine, health and society. Now, when you look at sociologists, why are sociologists interested in studying health and disease? Not because they would want to understand the suffering, pain, etc., but it is also, it helps how a society and a social organization works. So, disease, health, sickness are entry points for sociologists to understand how society actually works, because any of the medical institutions and systems that are evolved are primarily in terms of the social networks and social organizations. So, if you look at the living conditions of people, why do you think that poor people actually get sick early compared to the rich people? Why do you think women are more sick compared to men? So, the reason is not because the germs or viruses actually affect the poor people more, no, it is primarily because the way they live, the living conditions actually determine the causation of these diseases. So, how do we understand the causative factors? How do we explain the relation between the health and society? In social sciences, we do not actually recognize that diseases are primarily a biological phenomena. They are largely a social phenomena because they are socially produced within a particular context. Okay. So, we need to understand mediating social factors. If you look at the mediating social factors such as caste, class, ethnicity, region, all these are mediating social factors that influence causation of disease. So, is there one way of understanding the relation between medicine, health and society in social sciences? No, there are different theoretical perspectives, and each of the theoretical perspective provides a particular explanation. Okay. Basically, theory provides the basis to explain the relation between health and society. So, if you look at different theoretical perspectives, one, you have the functionalist perspective, or what is called as Parsonian perspective to sociology of health. Second perspective is Marxist perspective or political economy of health. Third one is Foucauldian perspective or postmodernist kind of a perspective to health. Fourth one is feminist perspective to sociology of health. Of course, you have Marxist feminists, Foucauldian feminists. So, there are intersectional kind of a factors also which actually add to the social theory, and the last one, the subaltern scholars. So, there is a subaltern approach to sociology of health. So, there are various theoretical perspectives that today we are going to learn. So, when you look at each of these perspectives, so when you look at, say for instance, Marxist perspective, or political economy. Marxists believe that medicine is an instrument of capitalist society. Medicine actually reproduces the class structure, the dominant social values of a particular class, and therefore Marxists actually emphasize on the economic dimensions and economic structures that influence disease causation. In fact, Marxists argue that within capitalism there is a kind of a contradiction between for profit and for the needs of the people, but it is always for profit that dominates and serves the interests of a particular class of people. And therefore, they say that medicine, which is an instrument or agency of social control in terms of controlling the working classes, either in issuing the certificates or in trying to control their lives through the certification process. So, this is something that capitalist kind of a society imbibes certain ethos that only contribute to for profit medicine in the society. And in fact, they also argue that there is a lot of individualization and depoliticization of diseases that happens because they blame the individuals. They actually label them as victims, because it is individual who is responsible for their own health, and therefore capitalist society and structures are not to be blamed. While Parsonians or functionalists actually have a different viewpoint. Parsonian sociology talks about the benevolent kind of a role that medical profession plays. In fact, they argue that there is an altruism or altruistic kind of attitude that actually contributes to the peace, harmony and stability of the society, and in fact medicine serves as the instrument that actually stabilizes. So, Parsons, when he was trying to explain the transition from pre-industrial to industrial society, in the modern society there is lot of strain that individuals actually undergo, and this strain may cause individuals to assume what is called as sick role, meaning that the possibility of escaping the professional work that is assigned to each individual is, all the time there is a possibility of deviance, and medical professionals, the functionalists believe that regulate, they regulate the kind of deviance in the society, and medical professionals actually have a very, very noble cause. And in fact, they actually contradict the Marxian kind of a logic, saying that while this is a capitalist economy, there are lot of non-capitalist structures, and medicine is one of the non-capitalist structures which is serving the interests of the people. They give an example. For instance, they say that when a patient comes to the doctor, they do not ask which caste are you, which class are you, which region are you. For them, it is a noble cause to serve any sick person. So, they put the primary interest of the patient before any other kind of factors, and therefore, the medical profession actually contributes significantly to the benefit of the society, and they apply the scientific knowledge to the maximum benefit of the suffering and the sick people. So, this is where the Parsonians actually try to contradict the Marxian theory and provide a different explanation, saying that the medical profession actually strengthens the modern society and its values, and they do not think that modern society actually is regressive. In fact, they always say that modern society has lot to contribute and it is actually moving towards a kind of a harmonious manner. While the Foucauldians or the postmodernist scholars actually try and agree that there is a social control mechanism for the medical professionals, and therefore, I think they argue that the professional power is very, very important, like the Pearsonians. Okay? But Foucault argues that a lot of professional kind of a power is serving the administered society. What do you mean by administered society? Medicine and medical institutions are largely shaped in tune with the needs of the professional groups rather than needs of the ordinary human beings. And therefore, Foucault says that the role of professionals, the medical professionals, is to categorize people between sane, insane, between normal, abnormal, healthy or sick people. So, the moment you categorize people, it is easy to administer that these are all people that need to be hospitalized, institutionalized, they need to be put in prison, they need to be put in certain institutional kind of mechanisms. So, regulation is required. So, in that sense, I think while agreeing with Pearsonians that there is a professional power, Foucault actually argues that the professionals actually play a role in categorizing. Okay? And in terms of actually taking up like the Marxian kind of a notion of class power and class structure, Foucault argues that the power is not centralized in any particular class. Power actually is diffused, meaning that there is each individual actually believes that we are actually going through certain processes because this is something that is imbibed in a natural way. Okay. So, the diffused power actually leads to what he calls it as self surveillance. Okay. I can give you some examples. For instance, if you look at the way we dress, do you think that somebody is actually telling us how to dress, how to walk? No, it is actually self kind of imposed. So, this is what Foucault emphasizes, saying that the professional power is not actually imposed by any group, but it is self imposed. Okay. So, self surveillance, the administered society and organized kind of a structures of power, this is where Foucault actually emphasizes and says that the relation between a doctor and a patient is actually what he calls it as biopower, meaning that there is definitely a kind of a hierarchical relationship which is accepted by the patient, that they are submissive, they accept the professional power, and that is something that he analyzes how in a society the relation actually between medicine, health and society actually goes on. Okay. Now, the feminist scholars actually have problem with most of these theoretical perspectives, primarily because they argue that while these theories have emphasized on the class, caste, race, ethnicity and other dimensions, the gender hierarchy is not at all looked at. So, when you look at the medical domain, to a large extent it is male template of the body that gets imposed. So, to a large extent medical science explains body as universal. What it means is that a male body is a canonical form that is used as a template to actually serve both men and women. Okay. So, to a large extent women's bodies are undermined, women's bodies are seen mostly as reproductive kind of a containers rather than women as persons, women who undergo a different experience in terms of their menstrual cycles, in terms of their entire experiences of menopause and childbirth and nurturing, whole range of experiences actually reconfigure the bodily contours, which is not at all addressed in the other theories. So, feminist theories radically depart and say that sociology of body, which is which should actually give a distinct perspective in terms of understanding experiences of men and women as different, distinct, and therefore bodies need to be understood in a contextual kind of a manner. And feminist scholars also had problems with both the Marxists and the Foucauldians and Pearsonians, because the gender actually is not at all brought into their analytical kind of categories. Of course, there are Marxist kind of a feminists who argue that the intersection between class and patriarchy need to be understood more clearly, and the Foucauldians actually argue that when you are trying to categorize, the way women's bodies actually are categorized are different, therefore the diffused power relationship in terms of men controlling women's bodies need to be actually analyzed. Okay. So, these are different ways. Okay. While the subaltern scholars argue that the theoretical kind of approaches in social sciences only talk about the institutional structures, the formal kind of structures, the text based medicine and medical sciences, what happens to the whole range of folk medical practices, what happens to the indigenous and localized kind of medical practices. So, the subaltern scholars argue that a large part of the knowledge production takes place within the communities. So, when you are trying to reconstruct the history, the way knowledge actually emanates from below, from the people themselves, is not actually taken into consideration by the other theoretical kind of approaches. So, subaltern kind of a theorist talks about how marginality is attributed to folk medicine, indigenous medicine. Okay. They say that a lot of these healers in different communities actually innovate, experiment, they try and improve the practices, and these knowledge practices actually have essentially made the people survive in the communities rather than the text based and scientific and textual based medicine alone. So, subaltern scholars are trying to turn the whole picture upside down to say that we also need to understand the other side, which is the healing practices, whether it is the kind of bhagats and bhuas or dais in each of the village communities who actually contribute to the deliveries and pregnancy and sharing the knowledge, or a lot of shamans and other set of local healers, actually the jadi butti and the kind of herbalists who contribute significantly towards understanding of human body, anatomy, etc. And therefore, how can you understand the relation between medicine and health and society if you do not actually incorporate this dimension at all? Okay. So, why are we talking about these different perspectives? These different perspectives actually provide the diverse approaches to understand the relation or the interconnections. Okay. While sociology of health tries to bring together these perspectives, in a sense that they try and argue that disease and inequality are interrelated, and therefore understanding the caste, the class, gender, ethnicity, the folk and other kind of perspectives, all of them need to be built in. Okay. So, while bridging the gap between medical science and social science, sociology of health says that while we do not deny the role of virus or a bacteria or a germ in contributing to a kind of a physical illness, virus themselves does not explain everything. Okay. The mediating social factors in terms of caste, class, etc., which are produced in a social, political and cultural kind of environment, and therefore we need to understand the larger context in which these kind of diseases are produced. Okay. And in that sense, scholars like Wilkinson and others argue that if you look at the relative difference between the rich and the poor, those countries or those nations which have relatively less differentiation or less inequalities between the rich and poor are the healthier societies. Okay. So, what is the social ingredient of health is something that they are talking about. The kind of disparities need to be less. This is exactly what Foucault and others argued, that if you look at in a modern society, okay, growth of hospitals actually indicates the intensity of sickness in the society. It is not modernity. Okay. It is the increasing kind of a sick society or risk society that we are heading towards. And this is where I think the social science actually contributes to the broader understanding in terms of the relationships and the way we need to actually look at physical, mental, social well-being of the individual and his or her relationship with the society. And this is where Amartya Sen and others actually try to argue today that one of the important development kind of indices is health, okay, the well-being. And how do you measure well-being? Not simply in terms of poverty or income or anything, it is in terms of the status of women in the society, the caste discrimination, whether there is less discrimination, whether there is freedom for every citizen to participate in the society, etc. And therefore, health figures very prominently in his discourse of trying to explain that human development actually is possible only if we improve the health indices, and health actually is not about understanding the biological factors, but understanding the social factors. Okay. When sociologists have adequately explained that while some of the diseases like tuberculosis, malaria and other kind of diseases in India or in third world countries actually have been the important kind of a causes of the high mortality and high morbidity rates, despite the fact that the advancements in science and technology have been achieved. Today we know that we have medicines which are available for malaria, for tuberculosis, and government is actually making efforts to deliver these medicines actually at their doorstep. But still, why do you think that people are dying more of tuberculosis and malaria? This is primarily where social science comes in to understand that there are a lot of mediating social factors which need to be understood if we have to address and tackle these kind of concerns. I hope you are able to actually follow some of these different theoretical perspectives. Okay. So, when you go back and look at what is sick role, okay, and why do you people actually assume certain kind of a sick role in the modern societies? Why do today students actually go to a health center to get a certificate saying that I am sick on so and so day and therefore I haven't attended so many classes, and the doctor becomes a kind of a person certifies and legitimizes that kind of a sickness, although he is trying to legitimize certain processes where students are deviating, right? Or when you are trying to look at the growth of corporate hospitals and the exploitative mechanisms and unethical practices which are rampant in the society, you can understand how the Marxist the theory helps us to relate the interlink in terms of how medicine is increasingly growing into a profit oriented, and it is medicalizing our bodies, and therefore these theories are very important. So, you need to go back and relook at some of these concepts. Thank you.